On a cold December evening in 1955, the city of Montgomery, Alabama, moved as it always had under a sky heavy with unspoken rules and invisible lines that divided human beings by the color of their skin. The buses rolled through downtown, carrying workers home after long shifts, and among them sat a quiet woman whose name would one day echo across the world. Her name was Rosa Macaulay Parks, and she did not look like someone preparing to change history. She looked like someone tired from a day of sewing hems and mending fabric, someone who wanted nothing more than to reach home and rest her feet. Yet history rarely announces itself with thunder. Sometimes it arrives softly and waits for one brave heart to answer. Rosa was born in 1913 in Tuskegee, Alabama, at a time when the promises of freedom after the Civil War had already been strangled by laws designed to keep Black Americans separate and unequal. She grew up in Pine Level with her mother and grandparents in a small wooden house surrounded by fields and the constant tension of the Jim Crow South. Her grandfather kept a shotgun by the door at night because the Ku Klux Klan rode through the darkness, burning crosses and spreading terror like smoke through the trees. Rosa, as a little girl, would sit awake listening to the hooves in the distance and learning very early that safety was not guaranteed, but dignity was something you carried inside yourself. Her mother, Leona, was a teacher who believed education was a form of resistance, and so Rosa learned to read and write with a sense of purpose. She learned that the world outside her home believed she was less than simply because of her skin, yet inside those walls she was taught that she was worthy and capable and intelligent. That contrast shaped her spirit. She attended segregated schools, where books were hand-me-downs from white schools, where desks were broken and resources were scarce. But her curiosity never dimmed. She watched as white children rode buses to better-funded schools, while she walked miles on dusty roads, and each step etched a quiet question into her heart: why must life be this way? As a young woman, Rosa married Raymond Parks, a barber who was deeply involved in the fight for racial justice. He was a member of the NAACP, and together they hosted meetings in their home discussing strategies to challenge discrimination. Rosa herself became secretary of the Montgomery chapter of the NAACP, working closely with activists who documented cases of violence and injustice against Black citizens. She investigated sexual assault cases involving Black women who were denied justice by an all-white legal system. She typed reports, she organized meetings, she listened to stories of pain and fear and endurance. She was not passive, she was not unaware. She was already a soldier in a quiet war for equality long before she stepped onto that bus. The bus system in Montgomery operated under a humiliating arrangement. Black passengers paid their fare at the front, then stepped off and re-entered through the back door. Sometimes the driver pulled away before they could reboard, leaving them stranded after paying. White passengers filled the front rows, while Black passengers were required to sit in the back, and if the white section became full, Black riders were expected to surrender their seats. The rule was enforced not only by policy, but by threat of arrest and violence. It was a daily ritual of degradation, a reminder repeated with every commute that society had ranked human beings and declared some more deserving than others. On December 1st, 1955, Rosa boarded the Cleveland Avenue bus. After finishing her shift at the department store, she sat in the first row of the colored section, which was just behind the seats reserved for white passengers. The bus filled quickly as it moved through the city. More white riders stepped on until eventually a white man was left standing. The driver, James Blake, who had encountered Rosa years before, ordered her row to give up their seats. 3 Black passengers complied and moved to the back. Rosa remained seated. It is often said she refused because she was tired, but she would later clarify that she was not physically tired. She was tired of giving and tired of being treated as invisible, tired of watching dignity negotiated like spare change. When the driver demanded that she stand, she looked at him calmly and said no. Her voice was steady, not loud, not angry, simply firm. In that small word lay centuries of struggle. The driver threatened to call the police, and she replied that he could do so. There was no dramatic music, no crowd rising to defend her, only the quiet hum of the bus engine and the weight of a decision made from deep within. She was arrested and taken to jail, fingerprinted and photographed like a criminal. Her mugshot captured a woman composed and resolute. Her eyes did not plead, they did not lower, they faced the camera as if to say that history would remember this moment correctly. News of her arrest traveled quickly through the black community activists, including E.D. Nixon, and a young pastor named Martin Luther King Jr. recognized that Rosa was the right person around whom to organize resistance. She was respected, she was dignified, she had no scandal attached to her name, and her character was beyond reproach. Flyers were printed calling for a one-day boycott of the Montgomery bus system on the day of her trial, December 5th. The message spread through churches, through beauty salons, through whispered conversations in kitchens, and on street corners. When that Monday arrived, the buses rolled nearly empty. Black riders, who made up the majority of the system, chose to walk rather than submit. What began as a single-day protest grew into something far greater. The Montgomery Improvement Association was formed with Martin Luther King Jr. as president, and the boycott continued for 381 days. People walked miles to work in rain and heat. Carpools were organized. Volunteers drove strangers across town. Churches became transportation hubs. The white leadership of Montgomery expected the protest to collapse within days, but it endured, sustained by a collective refusal to accept humiliation as normal. Bomb threats were made. King home was attacked. Activists were arrested. Rosa herself lost her job and received constant threats, yet fear did not break the movement because it was rooted in a truth that had waited too long to be spoken aloud. The legal battle moved through the courts while the boycott strained the city finances. Downtown businesses suffered. The bus company lost significant revenue. Pressure mounted until finally, in November 1956, the United States Supreme Court upheld a lower court ruling declaring that segregation on public buses was unconstitutional. The law that had enforced separation for decades fell under the weight of a simple assertion that all citizens deserved equal treatment. On December 21st, 1956, after more than a year of sacrifice, Rosa Parks boarded a bus again, this time sitting. Where she chose, the victory was not loud, but it was undeniable. A system had been forced to bend. Yet triumph did not shield her from hardship. The Parks family faced economic retaliation and constant harassment. They eventually moved to Detroit seeking a safer life. Rosa continued her activism, working for Congressman John Conyers and participating in movements for housing justice and against police brutality. She remained committed to civil rights long after the cameras turned elsewhere. She did not seek fame and often felt uncomfortable with the spotlight that portrayed her as a solitary hero, because she knew the movement was built by thousands of ordinary people who chose courage together. The image of Rosa Parks is often simplified into a single gesture, but her story is deeper. She was not merely a seamstress who spontaneously resisted. She was a trained activist who understood strategy, who believed in collective action, and who carried decades of experience in confronting injustice. Her refusal was both personal and political. It was an act born from reflection and preparation, from faith and fatigue from the knowledge that dignity cannot be requested politely from systems designed to deny it. It must be claimed. The Montgomery Bus Boycott became a blueprint for nonviolent protest across the nation, inspiring sit-ins, freedom rides, and marches that would reshape American law and consciousness. The civil rights movement gained momentum, drawing attention to inequalities in voting rights, education, employment, and housing. Rosa's quiet defiance became a symbol recognized globally, proving that change does not always begin with grand speeches. Sometimes it begins with an individual deciding that enough is enough and trusting that others will rise in support. As the years passed, Rosa received numerous honors, including the Presidential Medal of Freedom and the Congressional Gold Medal. Schools were named after her. Streets carried her legacy forward. In 2005, when she passed away at the age of 92, her body lay in honor at the United States Capitol, an extraordinary tribute reflecting how far the nation had traveled since that winter evening in 1955. People from all backgrounds filed past her casket, paying respect to a woman who had insisted on her right to remain seated and in doing so had lifted a country closer to its ideals. But beyond the awards and ceremonies lies the emotional truth of her journey. Imagine the loneliness of that bus seat, the silence after she said no, the awareness that consequences would follow, yet choosing resolve over comfort anyway. Imagine the strength required to endure threats and unemployment without surrendering to bitterness. Rosa Parks showed that courage can be gentle, it can be soft-spoken, it can wear a coat and carry a purse and look like any other tired worker heading home at dusk. Courage does not always roar, sometimes it simply refuses to move. Her legacy invites each generation to examine the seats in their own lives. Where are the quiet injustices accepted as routine? Where are the lines drawn that diminish human worth? Rosa's story asks whether we too are willing to bear discomfort for the sake of dignity. It reminds us that the arc of history bends only when hands push against it steadily, persistently, faithfully. In classrooms, children learn her name often in a paragraph or two, yet the fullness of her humanity deserves more space. She loved to read, she cherished family, she laughed, she felt fear. She was not carved from stone, but shaped by experience and conviction. Her bravery was accessible, not mythical, and that accessibility is perhaps the most powerful part of her story. It tells us that ordinary people are capable of extraordinary impact when they align their actions with conscience. The bus in Montgomery has long since changed routes. The city's skyline has evolved, laws have been rewritten, yet the image of a woman seated with calm defiance remains etched into collective memory. It is a reminder that justice progresses through choices made in unremarkable moments. When Rosa Parks boarded that bus, she did not know the world would one day speak her name with reverence. She knew only that surrendering her seat would wound something sacred within her, and she chose instead to protect that inner truth. Her life teaches that resistance is not always dramatic. It can be disciplined, it can be strategic, it can be patient. She prepared herself through years of community work so that when the defining moment arrived, she recognized it, she answered it without hesitation. That readiness transformed a routine commute into a catalyst for change and turned a quiet woman into a timeless emblem of equality. As we reflect on her journey, we see that the power of one decision can ripple outward beyond imagination. 381 days of collective walking began with one woman remaining seated. Laws shifted, hearts opened, conversations expanded because a seamstress in Alabama trusted her own worth. In honoring Rosa Parks, we honor the belief that dignity belongs to everyone and that even in the face of entrenched injustice, the human spirit can rise with calm, unwavering strength. And so the story returns to that winter evening. The bus lights flicker softly, the driver waits for compliance, the city hums, unaware of the transformation about to unfold. A woman sits, still, her back straight, her gaze steady. She does not shout, she does not argue, she simply remains, and in that stillness a movement gathers breath, a nation stirs, conscience awakens. The wheels of the bus continue to turn, but history has changed direction, guided by the quiet courage of Rosa Parks.